Definitely have gold fever. People probably know me best from Alaska Last Frontier because my family, the Kilchers, are on there for homesteading show.
She was the heart of Alaska. Tough, witty, loyal. But now, Jane Kilcher is done protecting the silence. For years, fans of Alaska, The Last Frontier, believed in the love story between Jane and Lee Kilcher. They admired their rugged lifestyle and the resilience they brought to the screen. But behind that wild Alaskan backdrop, something was quietly breaking. And now, Jane's telling her side. What was happening behind the cameras all along? And what rumors were true after all? In this video, we'll break down the emotional, raw, and sometimes painful truth Jane has finally chosen to share. From near-fatal accidents to emotional abandonment, this isn't just a reality show gone wrong. It's a real-life unraveling. Jane and Lee's quiet start. Before reality TV turned their lives into weekly episodes, Jane Kilcher and Lee Kilcher were just two people trying to find their way in Alaska. Their love story wasn't crafted for the cameras. It was forged through time, resilience, and an unspoken understanding of hardship. Long before the show, Jane and Lee had crossed paths in Homer, Alaska, where they both grew up. They weren't high school sweethearts or childhood best friends. Their connection came later, after life had already tested them. Both had lived separate lives, loved, lost, and grown in different directions, before circling back to each other. Jane wasn't born into the Kilcher homestead. She was from a hardworking Alaskan family, with roots in the same rugged town. Her early adult years were defined by discipline and compassion, working as a registered nurse and later in commercial fishing. The emotional stamina required in both professions prepared her for something else entirely: life off the grid. She wasn't raised on a homestead, but she had the will to survive. That made her more than just compatible with Lee. It made her vital. Lee, meanwhile, was already a Kilcher through and through. Raised in a family of survivalists, he inherited a life where nothing came easy and everything had to be earned. His father, Sr., had instilled the old-school values of self-sufficiency, hunting, and homesteading, ideals that formed the backbone of the Kilcher legacy. But Lee wasn't just a carbon copy of the men before him. He had left the homestead for a while, wandered, searched, lived his own life, and returned with a hunger for meaning, and for someone to share it with. That someone turned out to be Jane. Years later, when they met again, something had changed. It had not been the flame of a whirlwind romance, but rather a slow, mutual recognition. Both had lived enough to know this connection could not just vanish in a day. Jane described it simply: it just felt right. Without having to explain anything, they understood one another. Not at the very beginning, there they set about putting something solid together. In marrying him, Jane was not merely Lee's wife. Instead, she stepped into a convoluted family situation stretching its roots deep into Alaskan history. Lee brought along a son, Etienne, from a previous relationship. Jane carried her daughter, Piper. Merging families was a struggle anywhere for these people, but up in the wilderness, far from schools, hospitals, and neighborhood support, it was heavy pressure. But they did not see it as a burden, but rather as a mission. Then came Alaska, The Last Frontier, a show that would literally catapult their whole lives into every living room across the world. The Discovery Channel wanted something authentic, real, families living real lives in one of the world's most extreme environments. The Kilchers felt the need to be part of the show. When the cameras followed, Jane and Lee became central characters in a larger story about survival, resilience, and tradition. However, their story began long before that happened in that show. Yet even the strongest foundation can crack under pressure, especially when the cameras never turn off and the world expects you to smile through the struggle. And long before the marriage broke, the cracks had already started to form in the life they'd built together. The pressure of performing. When Alaska, The Last Frontier aired its first episode in 2011, everything changed for the Kilcher family. What had once been a quiet, challenging life in the remote corners of Homer, Alaska, suddenly became a national fascination. Fans tuned in season after season to watch them hunt, fish, prepare for brutal winters, and build with their bare hands. For Jane and Alaskan Kilcher, this meant their once private world was now under a microscope. And with that spotlight came a kind of pressure few can truly understand. At first, Jane didn't appear on the show often. She stayed in the background, still adjusting to what it meant to live on a homestead while raising two children. But viewers quickly noticed her. She wasn't just a supporting character to Alaskan. Jane was strong, fiercely independent, and disarmingly funny. She didn't try to impress the audience. She wasn't pretending to be anything other than who she was. And that raw honesty made her one of the most beloved figures on the show. But behind the charm and quick wit was a woman carrying a heavy load. Unlike many reality shows, The Last Frontier didn't rely on manufactured drama. It thrived on authenticity. Still, even authenticity becomes a performance when the cameras never go away. Jane wasn't just surviving in Alaska. She was surviving on screen. And when your marriage, your home, and your day-to-day life are being watched by millions, the line between what's real and what's for TV begins to blur. Alaskan handled fame much differently. While Jane leaned into the role, keeping all her fans connected and sharing parts of herself, Alaskan retreated more. He was quieter, more reserved, and focused on the physical aspects of the lifestyle. Over the years, this difference in how they handled their mutual fame became something of a quiet tension between them. Jane showed up, for the cameras, for the kids, for the fans, but Alaskan seemed to be disappearing little by little, even when he was right there on camera. They became, in the eyes of fans, the power couple of the show. Together they built cabins, fished, and braved the wilderness of Alaska's challenges hand in hand. But what the audience did not see was the silent sacrifice behind these acts. Jane did not just act strong. She had to be strong while raising their daughter Piper and caring for Alaskan's son, Etienne. She was doing interviews, shooting grueling scenes, and somehow managing the demanding everyday work of homestead life. And most critically, all this was happening while keeping the children off camera and protecting them that much more from the spotlight that was getting heavy for Jane herself. As seasons progressed, so did the heat of speculation. It whetted the fans' appetite to know more about their private lives. Every encounter, smile or lack of one, is dissected. Was this happy? Were they falling apart? In the meantime, Jane and Alaskan did the old show must go on. Keep on performing under pressure. They smiled side by side in all work and said just enough to hold everyone at bay. And while she never said it outright, her growing silence online spoke volumes. The love story that had once drawn in millions was unraveling quietly. Not in scandal, but in the quiet fatigue of a woman who had given her all and was starting to realize she had nothing left to prove. Because when the cameras stopped rolling, Jane was still there, alone in the cold, carrying the weight of a life they were supposed to be building together. The fall that changed everything. It happened in an instant, one misstep, one moment of distraction. In August 2015, Alaskan Kilcher was hiking near Otter Cove, a remote area along Alaska's rugged Kachemak Bay, when he lost his footing and plummeted nearly 40 feet off a cliff. He wasn't filming at the time. This wasn't a stunt or part of the show. It was real, brutal, and life-threatening. The injuries were catastrophic. A shattered arm, a broken shoulder, a fractured ankle and hip, 2 punctured lungs, and more than a dozen broken ribs. He had to be airlifted out by medevac helicopter, rushed to a hospital, and placed under intensive care. For someone raised in the wild, someone used to pain and discomfort, this was beyond anything Atsley had ever endured. And for Jane, it was a nightmare. While the world found out about the fall through headlines and updates from Discovery Channel, Jane was living it in real time. The fear, the helplessness, the trauma of watching her husband fight to survive. All of it fell squarely on her shoulders. She was the one handling calls, caring for their daughter Piper, keeping the homestead running, and silently preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. In the weeks and months that followed, Jane never complained. She updated fans with cautious optimism. She thanked them for their support, but behind that, Grace was a woman holding a fragile life together with her bare hands. Atz's physical healing took place. Atz returned to his social media space as his X-rays and reflective writings testified to his emotionally painful journey to healing. He was grateful because things could have gone far worse. Yet anyone who has experienced a near-death event understands it's not just in the body that matters change. The mind undergoes alterations too. Atz was no longer the person who had walked that day into those woods. Something had shifted. Perhaps the trauma. Perhaps the fear. Perhaps it was the realization that life was far more fragile than he had ever allowed himself to believe. Whatever it was, when he returned home, he came back more distant, quieter, restless. Jane could feel it. He started pulling away not just from the show or the responsibilities of daily life, but from her. He began spending more and more time alone, working on his remote cabin far from the main homestead. He told Jane it was for peace, that he needed space. And at first, she understood. She had been by his side through every painful step of his recovery. If anyone deserved some solitude, it was him. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, that space began to feel like abandonment. Jane was still home, still fishing, cleaning, raising Piper, keeping the family routine alive. But Atsley was no longer beside her in the way he had once been. He wasn't showing up, not emotionally, and often not physically either. The distance became routine. He would come home briefly, help with a few things, then disappear again into the woods. His need for solitude had become a pattern, and that pattern left Jane to carry more and more on her own. Sometimes, the deepest wounds aren't the ones that break bones. They're the ones that break connection and leave you quietly wondering if the person you love is ever coming back. Living separate lives. From the outside, everything still looked intact. Jane and Atsley Kilcher continued appearing on Alaska, the last frontier, shared scenes, and still worked the land side by side. But to those who had watched them closely since the early seasons, something had changed. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was quiet. Subtle in a way that's harder to notice, but impossible to ignore once you see it. Jane was still doing the work. She fished in freezing water, chopped wood, and tended to chores most people couldn't handle for a single day, let alone a lifetime. But Atsley? He was around less. When he did appear, it was usually solo, working on distant projects, often in isolation. Fans began to whisper online, "Where's the old chemistry? Why is he always alone in the woods? Is Jane okay?" The answer was more complicated than any single comment thread could explain. Behind the scenes, Jane and Lee had begun living what many would call parallel lives. They were still married, still coexisting in the same rugged landscape, but they were no longer moving in unison. The easy partnership that once defined their marriage had faded. Jane had become the anchor, steady, unwavering. Lee, the driftwood, floating, untethered, unsure of where he belonged. This wasn't a case of arguments or scandal. There was no single moment when everything fell apart. It was gradual. 1,000 little things that built a wall between them over time. Lee, still processing the trauma of his fall and recovery, increasingly sought solitude. He spent long stretches building and living in a cabin away from the main homestead. He said it gave him clarity. Maybe it did. But it also meant Jane was left to face the daily grind of survival on her own. The everyday chores were done by her: cooking, cleaning the house, arranging filming logistics, and safeguarding her daughter Piper from the public eye. Doing all of this with an apparent ease and grace that made her a sight to behold. At least she claimed she did all this with grace. Public sympathy seeking is just not Jane's style. She doesn't complain. Things unsaid don't always mean peace. Sometimes they mean sheer exhaustion. Truth to be spoken, long before the stony decree, both of them were emotionally separated. In her ordinary, understated manner, Jane would share that she was holding everything, and when it was possible, she would hope and believe he just wanted some time and space. But to keep putting a positive spin was harder to do with each passing day, while he became more and more absent, not just physically, but emotionally. What they were now building was not memories, but distance. With time, Lee's presence on the show became infrequent. Jane modified her social media activity a bit, though. She continued to post and show her love for nature and fishing, but spoke of him less and less. When she did comment in response to fans, it was with a polite answer. Nothing more. No stories, no warmth, just a brief and respectful response. That absence of warmth could speak more than any tabloid ever could. Some marriages end in flames. Others wither away undetected. Maybe the slow lingering of a dying love hurt more than anything else. Jane had given up her old life, her career, and her comfort for the sake of relocating to Kilcher homestead with Lee and creating something authentic with him. And now she was waking up to another day of realizing that she was still doing all the work by herself. With the onset of her teenage years, Piper grew in need of her privacy and space. Thus, Jane's world became even more cozy. The girl she had protected with great fervor was now growing up and maturing into her own person. Etienne, son of Lee, had already left home. And with Lee gone for days and weeks at a time, Jane became the one who was really holding everything together. It was not lost on the fans. Though they didn't know the full story, they could feel the difference. The spark was gone. The tension was quiet, but legitimate. Fewer glances were shared, fewer bonding moments, and more scenes that displayed how single Jane felt, even in a packed house. And when the home feels full, but lonelier than ever, that's when the hardest decision begins to form. The divorce, Jane couldn't stop. When Jane Kilcher finally confirmed the divorce, it wasn't a bombshell. It was a sigh of resignation that echoed what many fans had already suspected. The love story that once captivated viewers had unraveled not with scandal or betrayal, but with silence, distance, and the slow realization that some things can't be held together, no matter how hard you try. For years, Jane had done everything she could to keep the marriage from falling apart. She stood by Lee through his devastating fall in 2015, when he slipped nearly 40 feet and broke more than a dozen bones. She nursed him back to health, kept the homestead running, raised the kids, and still managed to show up smiling on camera. But while his body recovered, something deeper inside Alaskan didn't. And it was that change, the emotional detachment, the growing need for distance, that Jane couldn't reach or fix. Their marriage wasn't destroyed by a single act. It faded, season by season, moment by moment, until what was left wasn't really a partnership anymore. Alaskan had grown quieter, more isolated. He spent more time building alone in the woods than with his family. And Jane? She was still there, anchoring the home, protecting her daughter Piper, and trying to keep the connection alive. She knew something was wrong. She felt the absence, but she kept trying. Because that's what Jane does. She doesn't quit when things get hard. She leans in. She digs deeper. She stays. But even the strongest people have limits. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with shouting or tears. It came quietly, slowly, with one too many nights spent apart under the same roof. One too many decisions are made separately. One too many signs that Alaskan was no longer willing or able to be present in the marriage. Jane, despite all her efforts, was left standing in a partnership she could no longer sustain alone. When she finally declared the divorce in 2023, there was no bitterness, no blame. She merely posted, "Here we go. Alaskan is divorcing me, and it is very unfortunate, but I cannot control. Lost my best friend. Hurts, but I guess that is life." The words felt raw and honest, painful, yet somehow quiet with grace. She never fought it out in the public sphere. She never cast up an argument or a protest to set himself right. She simply accepted it for what it was, even if her heart wasn't ready to do so. What made it even harder was that she hadn't really given up. While the distance was growing greater, she hoped, this hope the whole time, that they just might find their way back to each other. That the man she had married would remember the life they had built together. But see, some things, even if strenuously rooted, do not survive when one party stops nourishing the till. Jane's heartbreak was far more than the ending of a marriage. It was the loss of her best friend, the one she had chosen to traverse a hard, wild, and beautiful life with. And such a loss bears especially deep wounds for one like Jane, so loyal, devoted, and fiercely protective. It's a kind of pain most people may never understand. She didn't lash out, but she would stand up when it counted, especially when the trolls attacked her or her daughter online. While her fans were harsh about her looks and cruel in their speculations, Jane confronted them with great courage rather than gossip or rage. "This black eye happened on TV when I got scooped," she said in another post. "Leave my kids alone. Leave my family alone and come after me." Hence, Jane was honest and protective. Someone who would never let anybody use her suffering as entertainment. She kept all the reasons for her marriage's breakdown truly private. She did not malign Alaskan. Her dignity remained intact, even in estrangement. The silence was, in truth, strength. Sometimes not telling your story is telling it. There was no headline news about the divorce. No media frenzy was created. For the long-standing fans of Alaska, the last frontier, it symbolized the quiet death of something iconic. That of a marriage of unbreakable bond, tempered by snow, sweat, and firewood. And yet, in that painful clarity, a different strength began to rise, the kind that comes not from holding on, but from finally letting go. Jane's new life begins. After the divorce, Jane Kilcher could have disappeared. She could have vanished into the Alaskan wilderness, left social media behind, and walked away from the life that once defined her. And for a while, she nearly did. There was a pause in her public presence, a lull where fans didn't see much. No family photos, no joint projects, just silence. But Jane didn't disappear. She regrouped. She took a breath. Then, slowly, she began to build something new. Not a cabin, not a homestead. Something far harder. A life after heartbreak. The end of her marriage wasn't just personal. It had played out in front of millions. Viewers had watched her and Atsley build a life together. They'd watched her fish in freezing waters, protect her family, and throw her whole heart into that rugged lifestyle. But what fans hadn't seen was the quiet strength it took to walk away from a love that had become one-sided, and the courage it took to start over. Jane's new chapter didn't begin with a dramatic announcement. It started with small shifts, photos of solo fishing trips, glimpses of time spent with her daughter Piper, and reflections that were equal parts funny and heartfelt. The energy in her posts changed. They weren't about maintaining an image or supporting a brand. They were about rediscovering who she was when she wasn't carrying someone else's weight. Her first priority was her daughter. Piper, now a young adult attending Western Washington University, had always been fiercely protected by Jane. She'd stayed off camera for most of the show's run, a decision Jane never once questioned. Now, in this new season of life, their bond only grew stronger. The two spent time cooking, hiking, and talking for hours. Even when Piper left for college, Jane stayed connected, proud of her daughter's independence, but always close by if needed. Jane also reconnected with her first love, the sea. She returned to fishing, not just for survival, but for joy. It wasn't about performing for the cameras anymore. It was about finding peace in the rhythm of the waves. She began running fishing charters, guiding others through the waters that had shaped her. And in those moments, tangled lines, wind in her hair, the thrill of a catch, she began to heal. The mood of her posts started to reflect something that fans haven't seen in a long time: lightheartedness. "I don't need a man," she quipped in one caption. "I need fish and peace." It was something of a joke, but more than that, it was true. After years of trying to keep a family, a show, and a marriage together, Jane was finally holding space for herself. She didn't rush into another relationship. She didn't try to monopolize the media or spin some great narrative. She had simply chosen to focus on the important things: family, work, and healing. Her friends, people she had known long before the show, resurfaced. Jane relied on her friends without fanfare and built a support system that lacked fans and followers, but did include people who really knew her heart. Fans sensed the change. They flooded her comments with encouragement and love. Some shared their stories of heartbreak and healing. Others just expressed their gratitude for the reminder that one can go through something that completely breaks them and still come out stronger. So Jane thanked her fans back, not with grand theater speeches and long emotional posts, but with gratitude. Mental health, burnout, and knowing when to walk away were all things she spoke about. Even pains did not embitter Jane. She had the right to verbally fire shots at Atsley, but she did not. No melodramatic revealing of dirty laundry or constructing a victim image, quite the opposite. Her dignity is soft but palpable. Her strength came not from stories shared, but from those she chose to keep to herself. And through that quiet rebuilding, Jane Kilcher showed the world what real survival looks like. Not in the wilderness, but in the aftermath of a love that couldn't last. The truth behind the rumors. For years, whispers followed Jane Kilcher wherever she went. Rumors, speculation, fan theories, all swirling around her marriage to Lee and what really happened behind the scenes. Viewers had watched them build a life on Alaska, the last frontier, had rooted for their love story, and had felt the tension when things started to quietly unravel. But as their appearances together grew scarce and their bond visibly changed, so did the questions. Was something wrong? Were they hiding a split? And why wasn't anyone talking about it? Jane stayed silent for a long time, not because she had nothing to say, but because she chose not to feed the noise. When fans flooded her comment sections with speculation, she responded politely, but kept things vague. It wasn't her style to make drama out of something deeply personal. She protected her family, especially her kids, and focused on living her life, not explaining it. But eventually, when the silence became its own kind of pressure, Jane spoke. In a 2023 social media post, Jane Kilcher finally confirmed what many had long suspected. Her words were direct and unembellished, revealing that Lee was divorcing her. She acknowledged the pain of losing someone who had once been her closest companion, expressing sorrow over the situation while also accepting that some things were simply beyond her control. It wasn't dramatic or accusatory, just an honest admission of heartbreak and reality. She opened up all her heartbreak and pain and made every act of fading marriage powerlessness public. She felt no rage over the words, but grief, understanding, and uncompromising truthfulness, which the fans came to admire in her. It was at that moment when whispers ceased to be whispers. It was neither from the tabloids nor from gossip blogs. It was from Jane herself, directly in her words. And all changed. Suddenly, silence has perfect meaning. Her increasing absence from the show, her solo photographs, her postings across social media betray any hurt but fail to name names. They wanted news. What made Lee leave? What has happened between them? Is there still more to the story? But Jane did not bar the door. She did not spin stories into interviews, release a statement to the press, or denigrate Lee trying to find the blame. She rather did the opposite. She defended her family. When trolls came after her, and, even worse, her daughter Jane drew the hard line. "This is not okay," she wrote after one incident. Through heartache, Jane led with grace. It is this that made her account of her life so powerful. Disloyalty would have been insurmountable in anyone else's case. People respected that she didn't use her divorce as an entertainment vehicle. They recognized that she opted for dignity rather than drama when it was more convenient or profitable to do otherwise. And as Jane rebuilt her life, she remained honest about her past, albeit with some care. In interviews and through her social media postings, she would sometimes reference the marriage, not with bitterness, but with perspective. She would speak about what it means to grow apart from someone you once loved and the importance of not losing yourself in the process. Jane Kilcher didn't just confirm the rumors. She lived through them with quiet dignity and relentless strength. What do you think about the way Jane handled her journey? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more raw and inspiring stories just like this one. And before you go, don't miss the video on your screen. It dives into another untold story that'll leave you speechless.